All right, I think we're live. It's the 27th of February, 2024. This is Gimbalabs Playground. Hey, everybody. We get together every Tuesday at 1800 UTC to talk about stuff. And you can see a list of stuff we've talked about since September. We kind of follow the academic calendar here in the Northern Hemisphere, going for the length of a school year and meeting weekly. There's a link to the the Gimbalabs calendar at gimbalabs.com/calendar, or you can learn more about Playground at gimbalabs.com/playground. And the agenda basically goes like this. We get together, we open up with some announcements, and then we open it up to a presentation. There's many different kinds of presentations. You might be pitching a product you're working on. You might share an idea and ask for some feedback, or you might start a conversation about something you've been thinking about. Often it's some combination of the above, and I'm excited that that's what we're going to get today. Steve, you were on an adventure a couple weeks ago, and you added governance with a small g to the agenda here. But before we jump in, anybody have questions about Playground? All right. Does anybody have any announcements about upcoming events or things you want to put on everybody else's radar?
Yeah, this is Newman. Hey everybody. I'd love to invite you all to come and talk about games in 2 weeks' time. There's been a few sort of initiatives about games and Project Catalyst, games and Web3, learning games, games governance games. Let's talk about games and the playground coming up.
Here, here. And thanks for scheduling that one. And I saw that you got a soft commitment from Santiago at
Yeah.
TX because they've been building some games too, huh?
Yeah.
Cool.
Actually, there's been some interest, so I'm gonna get a little calendar, schedule a agenda together, and we'll have a great conversation around it.
You should. Do you know anybody that's involved in cornucopias, Newman?
No, but I do know of cornucopias. They
They
might
are.
be a
They
good.
over. It overwhelms me how large that is. You know how many layers there are to that, and the number of people involved in it. And like something like that. That's kind of like starting as a success already. I kind of feel like it might be interesting to have somebody in there. Um,
Yeah, I basically,
I
and that's one of the things is like collecting all of the sort of awareness of all the different projects that are around. Um, I
well,
ran into
I'll
one. Yeah.
one of the OGs in Catalyst was a guy named Steve Aldrich, and he actually left Catalyst to go to work for the Cornucopias community. And I'll reach out to him. I just talked to him last week and see if he or somebody else from there can show up for this meeting.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. Steve Aldrich and Cornucopias. Awesome.
Yeah.
Exciting. Any other announcements? Good deal. Well, thanks, Newman. Yeah, really looking forward to that one. And for anybody who's thinking about something and needs a space to talk about it, we got an open slot next week on March 5th, and then a few open slots. There's all sorts of stuff that any number of us here could bring to the table. But if you're catching up with this video later, maybe you have a Catalyst proposal that you're starting to work on. If you need a space to talk things through, Gimbalabs Playground is here to provide that space. So looking forward to the next few months. But let's go to the main event. Steve, you went on an adventure last week, huh?
I did. It was crazy, because actually, like I checked the weather before I drove up to Indiana because it's, February, and it said snow flurries, about 5 or 6 in the evening, and I planned to be there about 4. Well, as soon as I crossed the Ohio River, you know, going into Indiana, snow started falling, and I was like, yeah, this is flurries. And then all of a sudden I realized, yeah, this isn't Flurries anymore. And I borrowed my niece's car, which maybe weighs 1,500 pounds, and, and had shitty windshield wipers. And man, by the time I was an hour from Indianapolis, I wasn't sure I was going to get there. It was horrifying. And like I drove a truck for a living, and it was just like it was crazy, crazy. And the whole northern half of the state was just iced up, snowed up, 6 inches of snow, unexpected, they said. And I was like, I looked at the satellite map and I was like, how could you not expect, because this storm was a monstrosity. So it was crazy because I wasn't even sure I could get to the meeting Saturday morning. It was that bad for, where I stayed. So it was an adventure. I just said all that to emphasize it was an adventure. I was driving to it and I was thinking, God, I must love governance.
Wait,
Which
so
is
did
not
the adventure stop once you got there?
to the meeting. Um, it was really entertaining. I never go to anything involving Cardano people that doesn't just make me feel glad to do it. And that's so weird given all of our frustrations with the larger process, the larger growth. Is that once that I'm like with these people, and it's kind of like the same experience I have in Playground. I'm glad I'm there. I'm glad I'm here. Like you guys are the smartest and nicest people that I know in the world. I mean, like seriously, I don't know of any other group of people that I have more respect and admiration and enjoyment with. It's a huge surprise in my life that they could be like that. So thank you all. Um, the meeting itself, went about, I don't know, 9 hours, and a lot of material was covered. A guy named Mike Hornan, who runs the Able Stake pool, after we had gone through some basic stuff, about DREPs, the the categories of things that everybody would vote on, the DREPs of the SBOs and the Constitutional Committee. Then Mike Hornan made a presentation about his experience in being a DREP on SanchoNet, and in doing so, because of low participation amount, there's just not a lot of people. There weren't a lot of people registered as DREPs on SanchoNet itself. He was able to pretty quickly just take control over it, and broke it. He was getting 60 more. He got the Treasury to fund him 64 million TATA every day, until it was broke. So that was funny to me. The other thing that he brought up is this, because the goal is for funding, application for funding to be open and permissionless, is that he was very, very concerned about whether through gaming or just massive requesting, that the thing could break down because of too many funding requests. And like when the plan, up until this point, as I understood it, was that when you make a funding proposal to the community, you have to put up 1,000 ADA as a deposit, which you would get back whether you win or lose funding. And so his inclination is to say we have to make it more expensive to kind of prevent somebody marginally involved with the community from doing that, from flooding it, because once the proposals are in, right, then you have to vote on it, and that's a problem, as we've seen with Catalyst. You can't, as a DREP or as anybody who's analyzing proposals, it's not possible. There's too many proposals offered in a Catalyst funding round. And with this kind of open-ended concept for making application for funding from the Cardano community, you could easily overwhelm the people who are, willing to do that work. of analyzing and representing voters. I don't personally know about the money, how that plays out. I don't know how to calculate, at what point it's not fair or is fair. Obviously, as we've always talked about in Catalyst, it's not fair in those countries that haven't even had access to buying ADA, that they have to have the same requirements as somebody, like Americans who were able to buy it for pennies. So I don't know what the solutions are for that. Other than my feeling is there has to be some kind of filtering, beyond, a high deposit amount. Like we have to be able to somehow say, we don't think you know what you're talking about, so we're not even going to put it up for a vote. But I don't think that there are perfect solutions in this situation. And that's something that, I'd love to hear other people talk about. I don't want to hear myself talk about that. There was also a pretty interesting thing from Matthew Capps where he talked about something that he was working on with one of his committees, but I really can't remember. It was just nice. And then it was kind of shot down by Adam Dean a little bit, like, yeah, that's not really kind of the right direction to go. But here was the thing that I thought was the most interesting, and I was hoping that Mix would be here, although I've already spoken with Mix about this. Adam, we were talking about the burden of being a DREP, right? Of, who knows how many proposals are going to come in. Just because the amount of money that the Treasury has, we can assume that there's going to be a lot of proposals made. And so we were talking about the burden of being, a sincere DREP and, sincerely wanting to make intelligent decisions about how to vote on proposals. And there's just this huge scope of the possible types of proposals, right? Because it's not just, really nerdy, low-level programming shit about protocol changes and technical infrastructure, but also then financial concepts that are going to get pitched to the company for DeFi. And we know that there's, a plethora of those types of ideas out there. I mean, we're already seeing them built. But then we also have cultural issues, like people are going to come to help build out their local communities. And, what do any of us know about Paraguay? Like how can a DREP, in an efficient amount of time, educate himself about something that's culturally oriented and then vote responsibly on that. And so these are huge issues. And that was talked about a lot that day. And Adam got up, and Adam, if y'all don't know Adam Dean, he's like really one of the smarter people around. Without being an academic that was hired by Charles, he was one of the earliest and most intelligent about how to do this. He was involved in that initial test net and is responsible for more things than I know, and are really stunning. The stuff that he has built, and seemingly really quickly. And he got up and he spoke for a while, basically saying that, like most people who are deeply involved in this feel that at some point, whatever happens initially with the DREPs, whoever and however many people sign up as a DREP, that it will stabilize at around 400 DREPs. And in his mind, the most where it's going to end up going to groups registering as a DREP. And this is not necessarily a new idea, but what was fascinating to me about it was that he sketched out on a whiteboard how groups would or could or should be able to,
Yes, Bobby.
in a decentralized way, make a decision about how to vote on proposals. And he hadn't been talking about it 2 minutes, and I was like, fuck, he's talking about Gladiator. He's talking about Gladiator. And I had a conversation with Mix about it, and he kind of told me where he was in terms of like coding on it. He's basically waiting on version 3, and I'm kind of waiting for the dust to settle in my life.
Plutus version 3.
Yeah, Plutus version 3. He's waiting on that to continue on with the work that he's wants to do in the Gladiator system. Anyway, I'm gonna at some point, as soon as I think Adam left Indianapolis and was making his way to Japan for something that he did with Yuta last week. And I'm kind of waiting on the dust to settle in my own life. But my plan is to introduce Adam to Mix and have them check out each other's repos that whatever may exist on these lines. Because I think every time I get involved in these other people out in the community, what I'm surprised by and pleased by is that whatever other people are starting to talk about, we've already talked about in Gimbalabs, or within the network of people that Gimbalabs collaborates with. And what I want to pitch to you all and have a conversation about is that we should consider, number one, because Gimbalabs is one of the original 14 people that got grants from Intersect, and Gimbalabs logos up on Intersect's webpage. But more than that, because of the people that we do collaborate with Mesh, with everything that Nori does, and Nori's another one of these people in the community that does so many things. I can't even list them all. All of us involved in Gimbalabs stuff, when we look at the totality of the parts of the larger Cardano community we touch, it's pretty large, even as we are. And it's something that I think that we should consider, because particularly for people who are become aware of Gimbalabs, because they also have in their hearts and minds the desire for the most idealistic thing of all to actually become reality, then we should, as a community at Gimbalabs, really consider being a DREP. And I feel like we should talk about that. I think that we should consider it, and we should begin to think about, as individuals, doing self-reflective work about what commitment and we as an individual might be able to make, but also and who else we know in the Gimbalabs community that could really contribute to making us as a collective a damn deeper, and I think that we can actually, I think we've been leading as a think tank for the last 3 years. I think that we've demonstrated a way to not just educate others, but educate ourselves. And I think that that's been acknowledged by the larger community, and we have lots of different evidence to point to that. But I think particularly in the initial stages of this movement towards decentralized governance, this community should take a leading role in that and actually be there and making their voice heard in a significant way. So that's all I have to say. You know, I would really like to poke you all collectively in the ribs and say, talk now.
And so you went, this was put on by Intersect, the DREP workshop.
No, this was Catalyst funded proposal from Adam Rush.
Okay, to have this space, because I know, Sebastian, you also attended a similar event in Colombia. Did you experience a lot of the same themes as Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. Some issues that were touched were, for example, this huge amount of money for putting a proposal on the table. In that, in the form of a solution to solve some bugs in the tooling that currently the Intersect this sanctioned platform has in this moment, because some brilliant guy, really brilliant guy, discovered some kind of bug where people can attack the vector attack, where people can send multiple proposals to this sanctioned platform. So the solution is, okay, let's raise the amount of money that the people have to put. But the idea is return the money. There is no problem at all, because they put the money and we, after that, we return the money. That's not a problem. And that logic, as Steve said, is not a solution in countries or in places where they can get 100,000 ADAs to put a proposal, because that I heard that kind of
You really heard it. You heard a number that high. So Mike was only he's like, he thought 10,000.
No, $100,000. Okay. Well, how can we participate as members of Cardano?
Well, the one thought that I've had since then, Sebastian, is that we might be able to mitigate some of that by budgetary guardrails, right? In that you can say, X percentage for infrastructure, X percentage for, education, X percentage for community development, and X percentage for DeFi. And, for the DeFi shit, yeah, they should probably have to come up with a lot of money, right? Money people should always have to put up lots of money, but community people should maybe have to put up less money. And so I've been thinking about that a little bit. And, I don't know if I ever get another discussion about this issue, but I think that's, to me, that's part of the budgetary conversation that will come once this thing even exists.
I think all of these kind of ideas emerge from a kind of brainstorming exercise, because I have the confidence that these people is not taking some steps for a bad intention or something like that. They have in this moment that problem, that bugging problem, and they are looking for solutions. And the first solution, unfortunately, is, okay, let's raise the price of the money that you have to put for presenting a proposal. But I feel that in the way they can find some kind of a better solution, and some better solution in technical terms, and they can modify this kind of they can offer a better solution. I think.
Well, and I think one thing that may come up is that, like whatever deposits required, if somebody actually has a good proposal and doesn't have any money, we, like we or WADA or somebody could sponsor them by actually providing the ADA, for their proposal deposit. And I think that's something that would kind of grow naturally or unnaturally. I mean, if we just start talking about it, I think that's how ideas grow. It's just.
And I don't know how this kind of ideas works in the minds of the people that is not part of the Cardano community. Because in Colombia, for example, there were a mix. There was a mix between people part of the community and people newcomers to this all this subject. And talking about the money, this money issue, I don't know how that works in the minds of people that heard by first time okay, you have to put 100,000 ADAs for a proposal, and taking into account the current price of the ADAs. I don't know, but sure, many other topics were treated in this meeting, in the meeting. It's really good. I was in the first governance meeting around the SIP 1694, and this time I have the impression of maybe the topic is gaining some kind of traction or some kind of facility to explain the people what is all the thing. First time when you explained all of these SIP 1694 and all the governance, all of this mess, that was really difficult. You have to make front to serious difficulties trying to provide a clear message. But today, I think it's surprising, but I feel a better way to provide ideas about all these things. That continues being a mess in some way.
I have less and less criticisms as time goes on. I mean, I have no idea if the fundamental thesis is correct, but I tend to like the way it's going. I mean, I don't know what we would expect something like this to look like, but it looks okay to me. I mean, I don't know if anybody have any misgivings about the way the Cardano community governance is being developed?
I really wonder if we're ever going to be able to reach these goals of inclusivity and sort of equality if we consider just the one coin, one vote. Seems a bit impossible to me just because of the breadth of difference between different groups around the world. And you would need to be able to consider other things like time invested or I don't know, any other type of participation that's not based on capital. Otherwise, you'll have a system. You will have a system. It just will. I think that there will be a trend to centralize, to be manipulated in some way. It's kind of easy, right? It won't be. You'll marginalize people inevitably. However you do it, if you're going to sponsor some other projects, right? What's the quid pro quo there? Like, I don't really trust a lot of like altruistic, like I'm gonna sponsor someone just because they're underrepresented. Mostly in crypto, man, not very altruistic people from what I've found. And I guess in general, or at least on Twitter, which is not a good sample. But yeah, it's my intuition is in most regulatory frameworks like this, first of all, there are institutions, there are public goods that make sure that people that could be marginalized get some sort of safety net, some sort of services provided, paid by others. But Yeah, yeah. My only thing about that is I don't think it's possible. Just with such a simplistic way of distributing power, decision power specifically.
You touched on something there that I think, with a little thought, we can make that be the baseline, and that's time involved. Like and a lot of this is, Charles has catalyzed so much thinking in me, but like when he talks about stable coins, right? Algorithmic stable coins. That's a really fascinating thing to me, because like how do we make this, how do we make this actually change the world? And it's for people who don't give a fuck about this stuff technically, but they want their work to grow their wealth, right? And so how do you do that? And I think that the concept behind algorithmic stablecoins is actually what may be best applied to businesses built on blockchain, right? You build a business on blockchain so that the owner and the employees have this transparency about, I spend 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day on this job. Where's the money go? Where's my money go? How am I represented in the overall ecosystem of this business? And some people should get paid more than other people, but everybody's necessary or you wouldn't have the job in the first place. So that validity in that business is, as a part of the decision-making process, is best represented by your time. How much of a voice do you have? As somebody who's been there 1 year as opposed to somebody who's 10 years and really knows the business. And so, like, if I use myself as an example, I had the advantage to take I had the possibility to take advantage of some educational opportunities when it comes to music. And I know from that experience that I could go to any bar with any band, and if I was to do that over a period of time and get to know 20 musicians, I know that I know more about music theory and song construction than probably 70% of those musicians. But they play, right? They put the time in, and they learn to get over performance nervousness. They learn to get over improvise and play well with others. And I haven't done that. I'd be terrible at it for a long time. Like I have a long road to hoe if I ever want to be a performing musician. And so my value in a musician or a music oriented community is kind of like the way it is in Cardano. Hey, it's not bad. I've got some perspective that maybe help, but I'm not, don't talk to me about the tau parameter on the protocol. I haven't got a fucking clue what that one represents. I know about K. It's like I know these odd things about the Cardano technical structure, but I have big holes in my awareness and knowledge on it. And so I think that this kind of, the same structure that algorithmic stablecoins have is something that we can apply at the community level, at the business level. And I think that, with some time and basic user interface development, we can make that so that it's accessible for people who don't care about everything that we do. I don't know if that really addresses what you're saying, Roberto, but I want to take away the anxiety, and I'm not saying that you have anxiety about this, but the insecurity about 1/8 of one vote. I don't have that. There has to be a way for your time in and your money in you know, and when I say in, I mean your time invested and your money invested, it has to count for something. You know, your voice should be stronger because of that. You know, people should pay attention to you.
But is the coin a good representation of value? Is someone
It's a
that's been doing
symbol.
stake pool for an amount of years but doesn't have a lot of ADA, is that less valuable than someone that just has a lot of capital? And that's a problem, right? Because we're transitioning from one system to another. So someone that has some advantages on others without really providing that much value to the network, to the system, can gain that advantage over someone that's doing it through a lot of time and hard work invested. And
Yeah, I
so in
think
this
it's
position, there's a lot of murkiness there.
well, I mean, but you know, we can use Gimbalabs as an example for that, you know, because at the end of the day, this is a very individual and human problem, right? How do I justify any value placed on me? You know, I mean, Gimbalabs has had a stake pool since I don't know, James, when did that start? 2020?
More than 2 years. Yeah, I forget the launch date.
Well, they never got any delegation,
Mhm.
right? And they've been in it a long time, but they're not being rewarded for being a part of the network. And on an individual and a human level, Roberto and James did other stuff to provide value to the community, right? And that's kind of like everybody's choice and opportunity, right? You know, it's like it's not just about the money that you have, it's how you integrate yourself into the process and create that value for yourself. Whether you're broke like I was when I got to the community, I was making wild bets. That's how I got into the community, you know, hoping for 100x.
Sometimes you got to spend some of the ADA you hold in order to fund the work too. Right. So there's people who have been here for a long time who hold a lot less ADA than maybe they did a couple years ago, but maybe
Yeah.
they've invested their time, you know, and so what's that worth? Where's the place for that? Right. So there's all sorts of different ways you can look at it.
And the possibility to do that came because of, you know, those people who did that, they saved up, right? So that they can make that initial buy in ADA, that initial bag that financed these last 2 years of the bear market.
So there's the question I really, Roberto, for me, what you're saying that's most exciting is this concept of how do we distribute decision-making power. That's and that might be a separate vector from one coin, one vote, right? Those problems may or may not be related. And we can look at it from both perspectives. It seems to me that no matter what happens at the SIP 1694 level, where, you know, initially there was this concept of sizes of disbursements with different parameters, which was very exciting to me, right? The rules should be different for a disbursement of 10 million or more ADA versus 10,000 ADA. And I'm really interested in seeing a super low barrier to entry for those smaller disbursements. Yeah, sure. And this is kind of how the original Gimbal project treasury was built. Okay, let's let anybody steal 10 ADA once, right? Let anybody, you know, fail to deliver on a promise once, but don't let them do it again. and build up from there. I'm really interested in seeing something like that, and whether it's time spent, like Steve is suggesting, or where we're throwing our hats in is around project completion, basically as a proxy for time spent. All of these are representable on chain, and therefore could become inputs to a governance system. And Steve mentioned, right, talking to Mix and how we're looking forward to Plutus v3. Just really high level from a technical perspective, what does Plutus allow us to do? It allows us to write customized validation scripts. A spending validator says you can spend from this address if you meet these constraints. A minting validator says you can mint this token if you meet these constraints. And we have a similar structure for staking and being able to withdraw staking rewards. That's all already built into Plutus. So what's coming with V3 is there's all sorts of new functionality around governance going on chain. And in Plutus v3, we're going to be able to make governance validators, right? Approve this governance decision if these constraints are met, just like spending or minting or withdrawing stake rewards. That's incredibly exciting. And what that's going to allow us to do is, just like we think about, the being able, the sky's the limit. It's so exciting to imagine spending validators, right? What rules can we encode here? And we're going to be able to do the same thing with governance, which to me, there's this question of how are we going to make sure that at the treasury level, there is a sufficiently low barrier to entry. But no matter how low we get that, just because, it's impractical to allow to force DREPs to make decisions on disbursements of, say, 100 ADA, or 50 ADA, or 15 ADA, right? That you can't clog up the chain with that much decision making. So no matter what, that smallest grain size is still going to be too big for many applications. And it's going to necessitate a way to subdivide funds coming out of the treasury. And the reason I find that really exciting is that it goes in the other direction too. Steve, your prompt a few minutes ago was, hey, could Gimbalabs be a collective DREP? And so if we look at coming down from the treasury to individual contributors, there's going to be a need to divide up those financial resources so individuals can contribute. In the same way, we then have to recombine individual decision-making power in a way where we could be that DREP, right? We could be that group DREP. Plutus v3 is going to give us, I think, most of the functionality we need to do some really interesting experiments there. So everybody here, I want to bring back Steve's question. When you think about shared decision making, under what parameters would you want to participate in that? Right? If we said that Gimbalabs was going to be a DREP with this much voting weight behind it, what would need to be true in order for you to say, yeah, I want to participate in being part of that DREP?
Yeah, and so then that brings back, down to that human thing. Who's going to study which proposals? What's the proof of your study? Like I don't know, like it could easily be overwhelming, if there's a lot of proposals, which everyone is kind of assuming that there will be. There was a back and forth at the DREP workshop, because there were some egalitarians there, myself included. I never want to separate myself from any of these feelings, because I have all these feelings. But there were some people there who felt like the DREPs should not be incentivized. And yet, when you look at the work that's going to be required, how could you not incentivize it? And so what came out from the people who are deeper into this 1694 work than I have been is it's an open question, and they're not dealing with it right now, but they do recognize, that's a thing. And if we as Gimbalabs were able to come up with a plan for ourselves, over whatever the next few weeks, months, to do this as a group, we can potentially look at this as an income producing thing for this Gimbalabs community, if DREPs are actually going to be incentivized. I tend to think that they will go with some kind of incentivization model. I have no idea what a fair incentivization might be, but it can't be trivial, because the decisions being made are not going to be trivial.
Can these governance decisions be localized somehow? So that a decision that impacts in some way a certain geographical area that has sort of like I'm from Guatemala, and then maybe a Guatemalan community should vote on whether because they're going to know the context, they know, and they will have a similar voting power. But I imagine that's not possible. But like,
well, I think that goes back to the idea of, like, budgeting and proposals based on budget proportions. I think that's kind of how it can filter down to, a localized use.
honestly, when I think about governance, the best way of governance to me, if you decentralize it, is at a local level. You will be most involved and the closest you are to the effect that decision will have on you. That is, I think, the best incentive for someone to really be conscientious about their actions is how close they are to the direct impact, which is something that's concerning, because I really thought at the beginning was like, oh yeah, decentralization, that's perfect way to make you really feel that the impact of that decision, of that role in governance. And one of the things when James sort of asked what would be the requirements to be part of a DREP, I was thinking, what is the philosophical underpinning of that participation? So Gimbalabs could just be a DREP focused on education, and that would really focus the work that we do and why we do it. And even then, in that case, maybe incentivization is nothing more than, yeah, we're going to do this because we believe in something. And it doesn't matter, because it takes a lot of work. But I do know, like, in some models of governance, legislators are assumed to be, they're not paid, because there is the belief that then the goal is not to make good decisions, it's to earn the reward. But that's neither here nor there. I like, it's not possible in this reality to spend that amount of time that is required to make that kind of decision. It's just we leave in certain things. have to be pragmatic in certain ways. But I just wonder, like, I understand Charles. Charles is an Austrian school of libertarian, and I do understand the idea of, like, we want to have this framework of the most freedom possible, because the more you give power to someone else arbitrary, the more it gets restricted and corrupt and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I just sometimes feel like it's really, I mean, even Hayek had some, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, can I ask you a question, Roberto?
Yeah.
You know, like in Guatemala, when there are elections, what kind of turnout from the population actually votes?
Oh, like 20%, something like that.
Yeah. So, and that's pretty high, right? You know, compared to Catalyst, that's really high.
Yeah.
You know, I think they say in the American elections, the president, you know, the presidential election might get a third or a little less, actually. You know, on these, it's about that this little town that I live outside of is like 350, 400 people. They get about 120 people vote on a mayor election. Uh, you know, and this is, I think these kinds of numbers, you know, around the world, I don't know how it is in Colombia, Sebastian. I mean, is it kind of similar numbers of people that vote?
It's similar. It's similar.
Yeah. And Bernard, I mean, are you from Africa, Bernard, or where are you from?
South Africa.
South Africa.
Yeah.
What kind of percentage of the people vote in South African elections?
The last elections, there were very, very few.
Yeah. And
Very
so,
few.
you know, like that seems to be a worldwide thing, but you know, worldwide we all suffer from fiat currencies, right? And so like fiat currencies kind of take away your ability, desire, and motivation to engage with your own self-governance, right? You know, because in theory, we're all self-governing people everywhere that we live. No matter where we live, we're you know, because whoever is in holding office, it's allowed by the mass of people, right? You know, the mass of people can kill anybody who's in government if they really get pissed off enough. I mean, we've seen that in the past, but most people don't care. And it's my perspective, you know, being 63 now, you know, that most people don't care because life is full, right? If you have a wife and you have kids, you know, like your days are full unless you tell those family members and those friends, you know, I can't even get involved in your shit because I'm worried about the people that control our money or control taxes or control business. And I have to do that. And I'm doing it for you, dear. I'm doing it for you, honey. You know, nobody goes through that shit, right? Nobody tries to tell their 10-year-old why or their wife why. And why? Because they don't do it. They don't engage with the government. They'll stay involved with their family melodramas, you know, and problems. And they'll spend their time working the job just to make sure that they've got shoes or food or whatever it is they need, you know. And I think that's there's that part of me that think this is a disinclination to get involved in governance because, you know, around my house the government doesn't touch. You know, I can spend all day long walking around the trees thinking about whether or not to cut this branch or plant this plant, and I don't have to think about governance at all, right? Nobody forces us to do that. Nobody forces us. And so The overwhelming majority of people don't do it, and for really good reasons. That's not the ultimate aim of human life, in my opinion, right? We're here to enjoy this experience of having a body and having relationships and seeing what we can make with our hands or our minds or whatever. Governance is an unnatural thing. And yet, if we neglect it, we see the price we pay collectively and individually for ignoring it. Bad guys will fuck with us.
I would argue first that we are political animals. That is the nature of our humanity, is that we interact with each other outside of our nuclear center, which might be our families. As much as we might not like it, it's much harder to survive when you're completely isolated. This doesn't feel that way because we live in society. And I wonder if that low participation is very much due to the way that systems have been built in such a way that you are completely detached from your government. It would take you so long and so much work to make the slightest difference in the way that you are governed. But that's by design. That's how those systems were created. And how we got to those kinds of systems, I'll tell you that a lot of it was the legislators. Why is the law so complex? Why is paying taxes so complex? That's by design. Those are people that got power and decided that they wanted more of it. And the easiest way to do that is take away education, make the laws and rules that govern you as complicated as possible, so you would be disincentivized from participating in it. But I bet something, if you had direct involvement in the way your community gets governed, and you had a way to directly impact those kinds of regulations, you would be having these discussions breakfast, lunch, and dinner with your family. You would be a political person in your own home with your friends and with your community. That's my hypothesis. That's what really kind of illusioned me about blockchain, was we can have governance decisions all of the time, and they don't have to be these huge things like a presidential election. We can just have a governance decision on whether we're going to pay, I don't know, however amount of something for something. And that could be a way for us to educate ourselves on how to be political, how to reach these ideas, how to be political with each other without the context of, whenever I mention politics, it's like I'm saying a swear word, because people associate politics with politicians. Politicians are the worst of the worst. I think that's like a consensus around the world, is that state governments and politicians are just, they don't serve the people at all. But I think that's the system by design. And my concern is that if you don't create the correct safeguards and put in place the right incentives, it's just going to repeat itself. People that have power are going to tend to try to get more power for themselves.
Just as a counter to that, I think part of it has to do with the fact that there's a lower barrier to adding rules than there is to refactoring rules. So like the government politicians aren't that great. I agree with you, but just because it's a lot simpler to add to what already exists than to refactor what exists, you're going to get a growth of complexity in the rules, because people are going to follow the path of least resistance for the most part.
There's in the United States, there's this funny thing that I feel like I'm the only one who's noticed it, right? Every corporation has to be established in one of the 50 states. Some states are harder, some states are easier. And what I find weird is that incorporation process is open and permissionless, right? You can say, I'm going to figure out how to take any kind of byproduct of manufacturing and that my corporation is going to take that byproduct and figure out how to make it fit for human consumption. And that's true whether it's fluoride or feed oils or, you know, like this endless list of things that in another part of society, we know that that shit is horrible for human health, right? And in this licensing of corporations to do business, there's no barrier, right? And to me, it seems like, you know, that one of the easiest things that the United States could do is to just say, oh, what you're going to do is make the water dirty? Nope, you can't have a corporation. Oh, you're gonna pollute the food supply with stuff that's not actually food? Oh, no, you don't get to make that shit anymore. And you know, like you can do that. That's not hard. But then you've got to have like qualified DREPs, you know, to filter all these corporate applications. And you know, I don't know. You know, like we have problems that should be easy to fix if we restricted, if we were gatekeepers, if we were willing to have gatekeeping. And that's, you know, like gatekeeping is not a restriction on freedom. It's just saying you're not free to hurt people. You know, to me, that's the bottom line. I mean, you're like, and that's the kind of gatekeeping that needs to be allowed in Cardano. You know, open and permissionless is not the goal. Freedom to provide value is the goal. But that does not include or imply freedom to fuck with people. And you know, like that's such a basic thing to me, and it gets lost in these ideological conversations and ideological systems built on ideologies, right? You know, like you've got to have common sense, and that common sense is human sense. And yeah, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you automate that. Go ahead, Bernard.
Thank you. In every different Cardano community I go to, like last time here I was on Singularity Net, and then in town halls. If I go to forums, if I go to Twitter, which is X now, if I go to Facebook, there's one good thing about Gimbalabs. I find always representatives, and I always find them positive with Gimbalabs. So that's an advantage. So one strategy that I can suggest, maybe you can deliberate on, is let's empower each of these, any Gimbalabs member, to vote. That is number one. How? Maybe it could be some suggestions. The second thing is to vote is not enough because you need power. So your voting power also counts. So it means the first step, if let's say we have got 200 Gimbalabs members, then we have got 200 votes. If it's on the catalyst, that's 200 times 458 as a minimum. That's a lot to push into governance. Because there is one thing I've realized with Gimbalabs. For 2 years, it is consistent and is always available. Those are the two suggestions that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Alex, I know you have thoughts. You're one of those guys who's just always thinking. What are you thinking?
I don't want to be a buzzkill. Like, because separate words and phrases that you exchange makes sense, but the whole conversation doesn't. That's all what I have to say.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with Roberto about the opportunities for localized governance. And so just want to encourage everybody that I believe is what we have the chance to try practicing here. Okay, so we've got the open governance spaces that in some regard will start transitioning back to live coding, and probably will fork those two things and have both open governance sessions and live coding sessions in the months to come. But thanks to the Gimbal pool rewards and thanks to Project Catalyst and even a grant from Intersect to work on Dandelion, we've got some funds that we have to practice deploying. And when I engage in that practice, I'm going to be watching it closely through the exact lens that Roberto just said. If we can figure some things out with how we work together here in this space, I hope in the long run that teaches me something that I can bring to municipal politics, participation, engagement, right? I actually have no intention to try to get out the vote for president, for example, but I would love to see a much higher level of engagement at that local level. And I do think that the work we're doing in 1694 rollout is a chance to learn something that has something to say back to the legacy world about how we make more people feel more connected to the decision making that impacts their lives. So really pumped about that in the weeks to come, that we get to practice that. And I'm sure there's other lenses that we can look through there, but here we are. We have a chance to engage in a process and figure out if there's anything valuable there.
In the S3 study group, we were trying to find a way to study how to implement sociocracy. And one of the things I really like about sociocracy, or really interests me, is the consent decision-making process, because it's a way to sort of, in a sort of decentralized way, but everyone gets a say, and the goal is to reach an agreement. And I really wanted to, and I'm still kind of working towards, I thought it would be such a cool experiment to try to get people to agree on a constitution through a consent decision-making process. Because I don't know if this is what Alex was referring to, but this doesn't have to do what we're talking about in governance in itself. It doesn't have anything to do with what we were talking initially about the technical things. It's almost impossible to sort of automate this system. It's just philosophical. And the thing is, if we talk about sort of the guardrails and the incentives, it's where do you put those? What is common sense? What are the rules of the game? We want to make them as simple as possible. We want to make them as small as possible, as few as possible, so that everyone can play the same game. So there's no asymmetry of information, and there's less opportunities for people that have access to more information to take advantage of those rules and create conditions that are more favorable for themselves and to others. Ideally, we want to play on the same level field. That's kind of the problem today, is that some are super high and work and play under different rules, and some don't even get to play the game. And so if we can level the playing field, that's utopia. How do you do that? What are the guardrails that you put in place? Do you make sure that there's always resources for education, for example? And so that is, and that's something that I don't see in Cardano or anywhere really. It's, if you want to change the world, what is a real goal here? What is the ethos behind it? Because there are trade-offs, and maybe one of them is that the numbers don't go all the time up, right? Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to reach the edges and empower everyone. So we should be investing heavily in making mistakes in areas that really need this kind of technology. Africa, Latin America, some parts of Asia, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't seem to be happening. Every time I see it, it's DEXs and all these projects that I'm just like, this is just, but that's just my opinion. But that's I think the question that we will eventually need to answer when we come to a constitution is that framework of rules, and that really necessitates the idea of what are we doing this for? What is the end goal? In some constitutions, it's the public good. And defining that concept of the public good is just horrible. It's beautiful because it's a whole mess. Everyone has a different idea. Like even the concept of justice. What the hell does justice even mean? Right? It means a lot of different things for different people. And I think we're going to find out that we're all like microcosms of people with different realities, different ways of viewing things, different ways of doing things, different ways of valuing things. And the best way that we can do, the best thing that we can do eventually, I don't know, is to let those people self-regulate, let small communities be as sovereign as possible. That's something I also like about sociocracy, because I don't think you can really reach consensus after a certain scale. It's just, I don't know, it don't seem to be designed for it. But this is just probably a little bit of nonsense and tangential. But I love this. I love this. I could go on about this and just talk ridiculousness all day. But I've said this before. I think the process is what's really going to be valuable. Is this process of really thinking about these things, because it makes you associate it with why everything's so screwed up today, right? Why we're so alienated by things that restrict our freedom in a really real way, and we have literally nothing to do about it. I live in the States now, and it feels so oppressive, so fucking oppressive, more so than Guatemala, because Guatemala has laws, but they don't work. No one cares. So you have a lot of freedom unless you get sort of caught or something, but you can do a lot. Here, it's just like, oof, Jesus Christ. So it makes me think about a lot about those differences in systems and how power is distributed, who has power, how does that happen, how these systems can be corrupted. I think at the end of the day, my main hypothesis is the problem is not the system, it's not the ideology, it's not whatever. I think the problem is corruption. The problem is abusing those rules, abusing those systems. And the question then becomes, how do you avoid corruption? And I think you said it at some point, is you incentivize good behavior. You try to reward those things that you want. You tax tobacco, maybe, as stupid as that might sound, maybe not, whatever. But where do you put those little carrots where people are going to want to behave in the best way possible? And for what end is kind of a question that I don't think has ever been answered, ever. Like every way of government so far that we've tried has failed catastrophically. And I was telling, James has read this book, The Dawn of Everything, I think it's called. The people that were trying different things, we wiped out of the planet. And that knowledge or wisdom is lost. Isn't corruption a side effect of a bad system? Yeah, that's true. That is true.
I don't know. I think anywhere there's a concentration of decision making or / power, you're going to attract the corruptible. Which kind of like for me, in Steve's version of how to fix everything real quick is, like we know how to test for psychopathy and sociopathic personalities. Let's find out how those people are, and let's kill them, and let's rehabilitate the rest of us. Right.
Coming at you live from the Gimbalabs YouTube
because
channel.
they are the ones.
This is recorded, right? Okay.
Right. Well, I mean, it's just the short version, right? And it's like, we can track most of the horrific things in human history to psychopathic personalities. And I know that if you kill them all, you are as bad as they are. But still, Oh, that's what
to
happened.
Adrian's point, I mean, who on this call is incorruptible? Would anybody call themselves that?
That would mean you're
I
Batman, right? Or
You're
something.
it's not possible to corrupt me. There's nothing where I would cut a corner.
yeah, I think that's like, that's the vagueness. What's corrupt,
Right.
right? And but
I think that the just having, like, if you're talking about governance on Cardano, there's not really that much that you need to guarantee for everybody who uses Cardano. So like there's the parameters of the protocol, like any additions to the protocol, stuff like that. Like I as far as other things that require consensus, I think maybe having some protocol of interaction where you can check that two groups match up in their perspective on how to deal with a certain situation, maybe how their smart contracts merge together, or whatever that would look like. But I think limiting the role of governance as a whole to things that affect everybody, keeping it small, and then having that localized consensus between groups that are working together is a better perspective as far as I can see.
It sounds like it sounds like there is a common thread of smallness and spaces where we can experiment. So that's the one thing we know we're going to do for sure at Gimbal Labs is keep trying to create those spaces for the small. Will it ever generalize to something bigger? Who knows? But we can keep the bigger picture topics in mind. Ken, I tend to agree, but I also recognize that we are about to enter an era in which, like, pretty substantial amounts of money are available via this system. And no matter how much any one of us might be inclined, I can certainly speak for myself to want to maximize my time in the local sphere. There is a global story happening. There's hundreds of millions of dollars at stake that are going to be distributed somehow. And I don't want to not participate in that decision-making process, right? So that's the balance here. So we get to play at the local level here over the next few weeks. But I'll be watching closely, and I hope we can have more conversations about what it means at successively larger scales, not because we are trying to have an outsized influence on those larger scales, but because we want to know how to participate, ideally with some integrity intact, and make some good things happen.
Yeah, so I wonder a bit about if there's going to be a clear distinction between Catalyst and the other governance structure. Like, because Catalyst is a place where you can have pretty much anything, and then I think that if it's possible to just keep keep the anything sphere of influence separate from the strict narrow view on whether or not the protocol is going to function for everybody in the community. That would be a good thing to consider.
I'm with you on that. And there's the need to maintain independence maybe between those spheres, while also having the ability that they can learn from each other. So I want there to be a clear delineation between what Intersect does and what Catalyst does, for example. Although one of my complaints about Intersect right now is it doesn't seem like they've taken the wealth of knowledge that Catalyst has generated and tried to incorporate that. It feels to me a little bit too much like we're starting from scratch over at Intersect. And maybe there's good reasons to do that. But what I would hope for Gimbalabs is that we can get better at naming, right? It's one thing for us to say, okay, we've been here for a few years, fine. But we should have something to show for that in terms of insights that are actually worth something. And so we can support processes or development, without trying to have undue influence. So more to come. So hopefully we can pick this up tomorrow. We got the open governance sessions Wednesday and Thursday at 14:30 UTC. That's Wednesday and Thursday, and there's information about that on gimbalabs.com for anybody who wants to drop by. Tomorrow we'll have an open space, like we have been doing for the last few weeks. And one of the things we can start looking at is how will we make local decisions about what gets done and how we use some resources to make it happen. So really looking forward to that. Steve, thanks for getting us going today.
I appreciate y'all listening to whatever I said.
We'll keep it going. All right, everybody. Hey, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Be in touch. We'll do it again soon, okay? Take care.